perspective presented by the New Orleans Secular Humanist Association, following our few principles of humanism.
We're committed to the use of science and reason for understanding the universe and for solving human problems. We're skeptical of untested claims of knowledge, but we're open to new ideas.
We are concerned with securing justice and fairness in society and in ending intolerance and discrimination. We are committed to the total separation of religion and government.
We affirm humanism as a realistic alternative to the theologies of despair and the ideologies of violence. We reject the concept of an afterlife and believe in living a full and rewarding life here and now.
We value and respect each individual's right to judge and lead their lives according to their own position, as long as it's respectful of other people, living in a free society.
We hope you enjoy today's program and others in the weeks to follow. Hello again, folks. I'm Harry Greenberger. You know I've been around here a long time. I have a very special guest today, and his name is Darryl Malek-Wiley. The New Orleans First Unitarian Church has a meeting once a month, which is called the Gillespie Breakfast. And at those meetings, they have a speaker who talks about a topic of interest. And that is where I first heard Darryl talk about the dangerous environment we're living in here in Louisiana. Let me just give you a little of his background. Darryl is a veteran of the environmental justice movement. He has worked for over 30 years with communities along the Mississippi River to fight toxic pollution and protect people's health. He joined the Sierra Club Environmental Justice Program in June of 2004 to support the efforts of Louisiana environmental justice groups on issues including toxics, pollution, and environmental health. He has been dedicated to protecting Louisiana's environment and people throughout his career. He was a key organizer of the Great Toxics March from Baton Rouge to New Orleans in 1988. This march defined the problem of toxic emissions in the, quote, cancer alley, and launched the campaign for improvement that continues today. Darryl, tell us something about the dangers we're facing and what's being done about it.
Yeah, there are many different dangers we're facing today, and we're working on a lot of different fronts. So if we're looking at chemical issues, just last week they had a tornado that impacted a refinery just up the river. And so these kind of unexpected consequences of weather sometimes are very hazardous because of the nature of the chemicals we're dealing with are very toxic, very flammable, under pressure, and accidents can happen and do happen.
And are those refineries close to habitation to people?
Yes, there's sort of since these petrochemical plants have sort of moved into Louisiana since mainly after World War II. And when they were moving in, they were looking to buy land. And what has happened is after the U.S. Civil War, when the plantations and slaves were freed, the slave owners gave land to their slaves adjacent to the property. You can see it's going up the river. So the companies actually bought the old plantations, the big pieces of land. And so you have small communities of African American citizens living beside a number of these plants.
And they needed to, and wanted to be along the riverfront for the boats that would come through.
They need to be on the river because transportation of materials. Also, before we put in the Clean Water Act in 1970s, they used to just dump everything they didn't need into the river.
How many refineries do we have in Louisiana?
Refineries and petrochemical plants, there's over 140 between New Orleans and Baton Rouge.
That's a large number.
That's a large number. There's also a large concentration over in Lake Charles on the west part of the state, and there's other plants sort of throughout the state, but the big concentration is along the Mississippi River, since it's such a good transportation access.
Other than some active nature like a hurricane or something, what dangers do we face? I mean, what could happen at one of those locations?
Right. We've seen accidents at these plants just from, in some cases, lack of maintenance, in some cases, human error, where you have explosions, where you have exposure of the community to toxic releases. And the Louisiana Bucket Brigade, who tracks these type of accidents, looks at least one accident at a petrochemical plant every week in Louisiana.
That's incredible.
It's an incredible amount.
Every week there's an accident.
Some place there's an accident in Louisiana.
All right, and some of those accidents don't have dire results.
Right.
Have some of them
Right.
had some serious outcomes?
They've had, in the past, there was an explosion at Norco back in the late 1980s that killed a couple men who worked at the plant and then caused significant damage to houses all around the facility. There have been situations where in Geismar and St. Gabriel up the river where there have been spills that in one case, a state policeman was responding to the accident and drove into a cloud thinking it was fog, but it wasn't, and he became very seriously ill and is still suffering side effects from that exposure to this date, and that's tens of years ago.
I see. Well, when you're talking about how long these things can last, are there presently things in the air or the water or the ground that are still dangerous to us?
Yes, and that's part of the problem with all of these plants. Each plant is sort of individually permitted. So in an area like Geismar, there are 17 different chemical plants in a very small concentrated area. Each of those plants emit different chemicals. And by itself, each plant in isolation might be only a little bit, but when you add up the total amount, and we did back in the 80s, and it's still significant, it was they were permitted to discharge over 197 million pounds of pollutants per year. And you start figuring out, how many pounds per person, it gets really significant. And that's one reason we talked about, Cancer Alley. And the problem with all these chemicals, our science right now can take a chemical and run it through tests and determine, yes, that chemical causes cancer. Mm-hmm. But in some situations where you've got these petrochemical plants, you have 5, 10, 15, 20 chemicals all interacting with the air, the water, the land, and we just scientifically we can't claim that the problems are the petrochemical plants, but we can, as a reasonable person, think that there is some link.
What can Sierra Club do about all of that?
We've done a number of things through the years. We've been a very active participant in permitting process, which is the whole process where these companies need permits to poison the air and water. We've helped reduce the emissions from some of these plants. We've filed lawsuits. We've had demonstrations in front of plants, and just a whole range of things to bring to public attention some of the issues of pollution levels in Louisiana.
Are you seeking any kind of legislation, and if so, what could it do?
Right. This year, we were involved in a number of issues with the newly formed Green Army. General Honorary and John Berry have helped form. And one of the bills that we were pushing was an increased air monitoring around petrochemical plants, so the communities would have real-time data on what's coming out of the plants. Another bill looked at groundwater contamination at salt domes, and making sure communities were informed. So those type of bills we moved forward on. And the big one that we were upset on was related to coastal wetland loss problems.
Yes, John Barry was on this show, and it was a great disappointment to many of us that the Louisiana legislature is attempting to prevent their lawsuit. And we have a governor who will certainly sign that bill. Now, John Barry says that all is not yet lost, but it's a very uphill battle.
All of these environmental justice issues in Louisiana are very much uphill battles. When you look at the budget of the Sierra Club in Louisiana and compare that to the budget of Exxon,
Yes.
or Dow, or Murphy, or
And then you combine them.
then combine them.
They own our legislature.
The Sierra Club and the Louisiana Environmental Action Network put together a report card in the past and did an analysis of how many paid lobbyists the petrochemical industry hired at that time. The Sierra Club has a part-time lobbyist, one. That's the only paid environmental lobbyist in the state, part-time. The industry had over 140 people paid full-time to lobby our legislature, and there's only 144 members of the House and Senate. So the scale is just amazing.
How do you manage to keep going with those kind of numbers against you?
Well, for me, it's always been about justice and democracy, and the struggle for justice and democracy is not an easy one, and we work on it. We work every day at trying to make sure that our democracy in America is active and not corrupted by large amounts of money. And it's something that we're seeing not only in Louisiana but across the U.S., across the world, the growing power of these large corporations, which are not democratic in nature. They're interested in money.
Is there any light at the end of the tunnel?
Well, there always has to be a light at the end of the tunnel, because if you weren't optimistic working on environmental issues, you wouldn't work on them very long.
Of course.
Just last Thursday, the Santamini Parish Council voted to enact a moratorium on fracking, which is a type of drilling for oil in Santamini. They're talking about moving forward with an outright ban of fracking. So that's a very positive situation.
But that is just their parish.
That's just their parish. But no parish in Louisiana has ever stood up to oil and gas industry before.
I see. Well, how much of Louisiana is fertile area for more fracking?
It's the main area was, we've heard about the Haynesville Shale, which is up in North Louisiana near Shreveport. They've been fracking in that area, but it is actually on the downslope now with production. The Tuscaloosa Shale, which runs across the North Shore, basically goes all the way across the state of Louisiana to Texas.
Now, I have seen reports that say it's possible that fracking causes small earthquakes. Is there any scientific basis for that?
There's more and more information being developed that correlates earthquakes to fracking. They're finding this in Ohio, Oklahoma, Texas, because what's happening with this process, they break up the rock and then they extract liquids, and when the liquids are gone, the rock collapses. And then that's translated into small earthquakes. So we're seeing more and more of that around the country, and with fracking, it's more evidence is growing over time that there are serious technological questions and safety questions related to fracking.
It would seem to me that getting the oil and gas out in the Gulf should be a whole lot more productive than trying to squeeze it out of shale. So why are they doing that?
It's a combination of factors. The companies that are doing the fracking are not traditionally the large players in the oil and gas industry. They're smaller companies. Exxon and Mobil aren't major frackers. They're out in the Gulf. BP is out in the Gulf. So it's smaller, some wildcatting operations, as they're called, that are doing the fracking all over the country. And, you know, it's just, the bigger picture is how long are we can continue to depend on oil and gas?
Yes.
There are new technologies now that we have hybrid cars, we have plug-in cars, we need more mass transit, we need the rail line from New Orleans to Baton Rouge. All these different things need to happen to really shift our policies around to not so much dependent on oil and gas, but the end result. If I want to go to Baton Rouge, I'd much prefer to ride on a train for an hour than to get in the interstate and sometimes be sitting on the Causeway Bridge because somebody had an accident. And it just makes sense. It's a different type of way of thinking about travel that I know that in Europe, the train rail system is amazing.
And they're very rapid.
They're very rapid, very quick, and that technology could be put in place in Louisiana and the rest of the United States if there was a shift away from all the subsidies and tax breaks given to oil and gas.
Now, just to change the topic a
Right,
little,
we can do that.
let's talk about mercury.
Right.
All right. You spent a lot of time talking about mercury at that event that I referred to. Tell us about that danger.
Yeah, mercury's, everybody's seen it in the thermometer, not so much anymore because people know more and more about the dangers of mercury. It was used a lot of different ways, but it was used in tanning of skins to make hats. And the mercury, if you put it on your skin, it goes in your skin and causes mental disorders. So they used to talk about mad hatters. They were actually mad because of the mercury contamination that they were contacting. So mercury is from burning coal and refining different things, and then it's traveled mainly in the air and comes down in rain. And it has contaminated a number of streams and waterways in Louisiana where it goes into the water, gets into the insects. The insects are eaten by fish. We eat the fish, and we have mercury issues. So,
and that has been scientifically established.
Yes.
That there is a level of mercury in a lot of fish.
Yes.
Which then can endanger the humans who eat it.
Yes.
What symptoms do they get?
Mainly a number of different neurological symptoms. They get twitching. They forget stuff a lot quicker. They're not as coordinated. You can't walk and chew gum at the same time, type thing. So, and the thing is with mercury, it impacts children and women who are ready to have birth more heavily than other people. So.
All right. Now you say a part of how it affects humans is eating fish.
Right.
Which fish from what waterways?
I don't have that list in front of me, but one here we're concerned of is the Pearl River, just on the other side of Lake Pontchartrain.
And what fish comes out of there?
It's a whole range. There's bass. The main fish that we like to catch are usually the top predators. They're big, and so they eat other fish. So bass, tuna. If you're going out in the Gulf, tuna has been shown to have different levels of mercury. Swordfish, once again out in the Gulf. It's a range of different fish around the state. I forget how many different streams are impacted right now, but it's significant. The other way we got mercury into our streams, it used to be the way to monitor the flow of natural gas through a pipeline was you'd have a monitor filled full of mercury. And after a while, those would get contaminated. They need to be refreshed. So the practice was to just turn it upside down and put new stuff in. And it went right into the groundwater. And there are a number of sites in North Louisiana that the Sierra Club, through litigation, has forced companies to clean up some of their mercury contamination from over the years.
All right, I'm still hung up on the fish.
Yeah, I know.
Is the DEA, are they testing fish and are they rejecting some? What is happening there?
Yeah, it's the Department of Health and the Department of Environmental Quality sort of share responsibility. Department of Health is the one that goes out and tests fish. They haven't put as much money into the mercury program as we would like. The Department of Environmental Quality had a active mercury program that the Sierra Club pushed and helped get funding through our state legislators. But they've cut back on that funding over time, so we have less information now than we used to.
Are we still vulnerable to getting bad fish?
We are, unfortunately.
And you say in some areas it might also be in the water.
It's mainly down in the soils and sediments of the water. So the things that like to eat in the sediments are crawfish.
Okay. All over the state.
Yeah, all down, little bugs, little things that are then eaten by the different fish.
Well, are they determining a large number of people who have been impaired by mercury?
No, they have. That's the problem with all of these different issues related to environmental health. There has never been a commitment of the amount of money needed by the state to really put a definitive definition of how many people are impacted.
If you felt like you were perhaps impacted,
right?
Do they have a medical test to see whether it's mercury?
There is a test that you can take to see if you've got high levels of mercury, yes.
I see, because you mentioned poor memory as one of the results. I have a very bad memory. You think I need to take the test?
Unless you've been eating, seafood and nothing else, I would say no.
Well, that's not the case. All right, well, tell us what else we should be concerned about or fearful of that's occurring in Louisiana?
Well, one of the biggest issues, related to Louisiana is our whole loss of our coastal wetlands.
Absolutely.
And we saw that with Hurricane Katrina and in some cases Hurricane Betsy. We're now looking back and thinking that if we would have had all the wetlands that were out in Orleans East, St. Bernard, that were there before they built the Mississippi River Gulf Outlet or Mr. Go, that the storm Betsy and then Katrina would not have been as damaging as what they were to New Orleans. Just because Mr. Go built the channel, allowed salt water to come in and killed over 30,000 acres of cypress trees, because cypress trees are very non-tolerant of salt. And if all that area would have been intact, a number of scientists have talked about the possibility that the storm surge that really swamped the lower Ninth Ward, St. Bernard, would not have been as significant as it was, and we wouldn't have had the damage that was caused. So that's an ongoing issue. We keep talking about how we're going to restore it. We do have the state master plan that was done by the state of Louisiana, which overall is a pretty good plan. It's got lots of good things in it.
Would be financed by taxpayers' money.
That's the hang-up. Where are we going to get the funding for it? It's a $50 billion plan, $1 billion a year for the next 50 years. And I could write a check to the state for $1 billion, but it would bounce higher.
Well, there was a famous congressman who said, when you talk about $1 billion here and $1 billion there, pretty soon you're talking about big bucks.
Yeah, well, you definitely are. And so that's one of the reasons that the the levee board filed the lawsuit against the oil companies because in the suit, it's not the oil companies were not totally responsible for all the damage, but it's
Just their
percentage.
share of it.
Their share, and that's what we want to do, is bring them to the table and pay their share.
And they have the money to do it without hurting too badly.
Right, that's correct. And just a study that was published this year by Dr. Ryan out at University of New Orleans
Yes.
looked at how many jobs would be created through this restoration effort, $1 billion a year. And the number of jobs created would far outnumber any job loss possibilities in the oil industry.
Well, there are those people who say that if that lawsuit went through, that the oil companies wouldn't want to operate in Louisiana, which is, of course, nonsense.
Yes, the oil and gas companies will leave Louisiana when they pump the last drop of oil.
Yes.
They can't pick up their refinery on the Mississippi River and move it. It's just you can't do that.
And they wouldn't want to.
They wouldn't want to, because what we've done in our research over time, most of the petrochemical plants along the Mississippi River are the largest plant that these companies own and the most profitable plant. So they're not going to walk away from Louisiana.
You're right. Now, Darryl, we got a couple minutes left.
Okay.
Why don't you tell our audience, whatever you'd like them to hear?
Well, there's what we need people to do is understand some of these issues and get involved. As long as we only have a few people talking about these issues, the wealth of Exxon and BP will control our state. And it's about democracy in Louisiana, and we need everybody involved to help protect our coast, our health, our environment. And so,
And what do you want all these everybody people to do?
Right. Well, since the legislative session's done, we can't have, they can call their representatives, but I think what we want them to do is learn more and then become active in political debates in Louisiana.
And they can learn something from your website?
Yeah.
What is your website?
The website is LA Sierra SIERRA Club CLUB.org.
And they can get
more information there.
More than what we have discussed today.
Right, and they can also go to Go Green Army and get more information about that.
And the Green Army, again, is?
The effort of General Honore John Berry and over 40 different nonprofits.
I see. Well, Darryl, I certainly appreciate your being here with us today.
Oh, Harry, thank you very much.
And I want to thank all you folks who watch our show. Come back and see us often.